My name is Evelyn, and I spent 32 entire years living as the completely invisible daughter in a family that only saw true value in their sons. I grew up constantly watching my parents pour all of their love, attention, and financial resources into my younger brother Julian, while completely ignoring my existence. When I was exactly 18 years old, my parents casually wrote a massive check for $180,000 just to send Julian to an expensive medical school. I remember standing in our dining room with my college acceptance letter in my hand, feeling incredibly hopeful. But when I politely asked my father for just a little bit of financial help with my own college tuition, the atmosphere in the room went completely freezing cold. My father did not even look at my acceptance letter. He just looked me dead in the eye, swirled his expensive drink, and coldly told me that girls absolutely do not need college degrees. He firmly stated that my only real purpose in life was to find a good, wealthy husband and settle down. That incredibly cruel rejection completely shattered my heart, but it also ignited a massive fire inside of me. I refused to let his toxic mindset destroy my future. I immediately packed my bags and left home determined to prove him entirely wrong. For the next 12 years, I worked 3 physically exhausting jobs just to survive. I poured hot coffee at a diner before the sun even came up. I shelved heavy books in the university library all afternoon, and I tutored high school kids late into the night. I survived on a maximum of 5 hours of sleep every single night for 4 straight years of undergraduate studies. I successfully put my own self through an incredibly demanding medical school without taking a single dollar from my toxic parents. 12 years of pure sacrifice and brutal exhaustion finally paid off when I officially became a highly respected cardiothoracic surgeon. I spend my days holding beating human hearts in my hands and saving lives on the operating table. But my toxic family knew absolutely nothing about my massive success. That brings us to last month when I reluctantly attended the lavish engagement party of my brother Julian. My father confidently stood up on a beautifully decorated stage in front of 150 wealthy guests. He proudly raised his expensive champagne glass and publicly introduced Julian to the massive crowd as the absolute pride of our family and our only successful child. It was a calculated public humiliation designed to make me feel entirely worthless, but my arrogant father had absolutely no idea about the massive secret standing right next to him. He did not know that the beautiful future bride standing next to Julian was the exact same critical patient I personally saved 3 years ago on my operating table. Before I tell you exactly what happened when the bride finally recognized my face, please take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only do so if this true story genuinely speaks to you. I also really want to know who is watching today, so please drop a comment below telling me your exact location and your current local time. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are tuning in from right now. Get ready, because this is the story of how my arrogant family tried to erase my entire existence and how their perfect golden child lost nearly everything in front of 150 people. Now let me take you back to where this entire nightmare actually began so you can fully understand the toxic foundation of my family. I grew up in Lake Forest, which is an incredibly wealthy and perfectly manicured suburb located just outside of Chicago. It was exactly the kind of upscale neighborhood where every single lawn looked like it belonged on the front cover of a luxury magazine. But behind every single perfect green hedge in that town, there were always very dark family secrets hidden away. My father, Richard, spent 30 long years ruthlessly climbing the corporate ladder until he finally became the chief financial officer of a mid-sized insurance company. He proudly wore an incredibly expensive gold Rolex watch on his wrist every single day. He specifically bought that luxury watch for himself the exact day he got his massive promotion. To him, that watch was not just for telling time, because it was his ultimate physical trophy and his absolute proof that hard work always pays off, but only for the right kind of person. Inside our massive colonial house, there were very strict unspoken rules. They were not the kind of rules anyone ever wrote down on paper, but rather the toxic kind you learned simply by watching how people were treated. My younger brother Julian got dropped off at his expensive private school every morning in the shiny luxury Lexus of my father. Meanwhile, I was forced to wait outside in the freezing cold and take the loud public bus. Whenever the grades of Julian slipped even slightly, my father immediately hired expensive private math tutors to help him succeed. When I politely asked for a math tutor for my own advanced classes, my father coldly looked at me and said girls only need to study just enough to get by. Every single baseball game Julian played was treated like a mandatory family event. But when it came to my academic award ceremonies, where I was constantly ranked as the top student in my entire class, my father never attended a single one of them. My mother, Eleanor, was a very soft-spoken homemaker who spent her entire life desperately trying to smooth things over and keep the peace. Whenever I questioned these incredibly unfair rules, she would gently pat my hand and tell me my father was just trying to protect me. But I eventually realized he was not protecting me at all. In the twisted corporate world of my father, daughters were absolutely never viewed as valuable investments. We were strictly viewed as financial liabilities just waiting to become the future responsibility of another man. And I was about to learn exactly how much that terrible belief would ultimately cost me. I was about to learn exactly how much that deeply toxic belief would personally cost me. The harsh reality of my place in the family became undeniably clear during the summer right before my freshman year of college. My mother, Eleanor, had prepared a massive Sunday dinner in our formal dining room. I walked into the room holding my official college acceptance letter in my trembling hands. My heart was pounding completely out of my chest with a mixture of intense pride and desperate hope. I had officially been accepted into a highly prestigious university, and I had even earned a partial academic scholarship based entirely on my perfect grades. But the scholarship did not cover absolutely everything. I still desperately needed about $15,000 a year to make the math work and finally pursue my dream of becoming a doctor. I nervously smoothed out the wrinkled acceptance letter and gently placed it on the expensive mahogany dining table right next to the plate of my father. I took a massive deep breath and politely told him about the scholarship, hoping he would finally be proud of my hard work. I softly explained that I just needed a little bit of financial help with the remaining $15,000 balance. My father, Richard, did not even bother to pick up the piece of paper. He barely even glanced at the prestigious university logo printed at the very top. Instead, he slowly picked up his heavy crystal glass and casually swirled his incredibly expensive whiskey like he was making a completely routine corporate business decision. He looked right past me and coldly stated that every single dollar of his hard-earned money was strictly reserved for the future medical career of my younger brother Julian. He firmly reminded me that Julian would eventually need to support a family of his own one day. Then my father looked me dead in the eye and coldly repeated his favorite toxic phrase. He told me that I just needed to focus on finding a good, wealthy husband to take care of me. I slowly turned my head and looked across the table at 14-year-old Julian. He was completely hunched over his expensive smartphone, intentionally pretending he did not hear a single word of that cruel rejection. He did not say a single word to defend me. I looked over at my mother, but she just stared blankly at her dinner plate, choosing to remain completely silent. The heavy, suffocating silence in that massive dining room was honestly louder and more violent than any screaming argument could have ever been. I did not cry and I did not beg. I simply reached across the table, carefully folded my hard-earned acceptance letter, and slowly slid it deep into my pocket. I looked at my father and simply said, "Okay." In that exact defining moment, I made a firm and unbreakable decision. I promised myself I would absolutely never ask my father for anything ever again. That very same night, I started looking for part-time jobs. College immediately became an exhausting blur of early morning alarms and cold coffee. I took on 3 brutal jobs just to survive. My first job was working as a waitress at a local diner, pouring hot coffee for customers at 5 in the morning before rushing to my early classes. My second job was working as a library assistant, shelving heavy books all afternoon and studying between my shifts. My third job was tutoring high school kids in math on the weekends, which was the exact same service my father refused to pay for when I was their age. I survived on a maximum of 5 hours of sleep every single night for 4 straight years. I never went home for the holidays. I told my mother I had to work extra shifts, which was entirely true, but the real truth was that I simply could not stomach sitting at that dining table, watching Julian open expensive gifts bought with the exact same money that could have easily paid my tuition. I was so incredibly broke that I wore the exact same pair of cheap sneakers for 2 solid years. When the rubber soles started completely separating from the fabric, I literally glued them back together with cheap adhesive and just kept walking forward. Those broken and glued shoes carried me to class, to work, and eventually right across the university graduation stage. I graduated summa cum laude at the very top of my entire class with a nearly perfect 3.98 grade point average. but I walked across that stage completely alone. My parents skipped my college graduation ceremony entirely because Julian had an important high school soccer game that same exact day. I received my diploma and cried alone in the parking lot for exactly 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face, got in my car, and went right back to work. But that was honestly just the beginning of my incredibly long journey. I applied to the top medical schools in the country and successfully pieced together massive student loans, academic grants, and work-study programs to fund my ultimate dream. I endured 4 grueling years of medical school, 6 physically exhausting years of surgical residency, and 2 highly intense years of fellowship training. The hours were absolutely brutal, and the daily pressure was completely relentless. 12 entire years of my young life were spent quietly building a massive future that absolutely no one in my toxic family believed I could ever build. By the time I turned 32 years old, I was a highly respected and board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon. I spent my long days holding beating human hearts in my hands and saving critical lives on the operating table, while my deeply arrogant family had absolutely no idea who I had truly become. I wore my heavy gold medical school ring every single day of my professional and personal life. Most people probably would not even notice the simple university crest shining on my finger, but I intentionally bought it for myself the exact day I finally graduated from my grueling medical program. It was my own quiet daily rebellion, and a constant physical reminder of exactly what I had successfully survived to get there. Everything I had spent the last 12 years desperately trying to avoid came rushing right back into my peaceful life on one random Tuesday evening. My phone lit up with the familiar name of my mother. She usually only called me very late at night when she was absolutely sure my father Richard could not hear her speaking to me. Her voice was barely above a quiet, nervous whisper when she delivered the big family news. She told me my younger brother Julian was officially getting engaged to be married. She nervously explained that my father was personally throwing a massive and incredibly lavish engagement party to properly celebrate the milestone. The extravagant event was going to be held at an exclusive luxury country club, and he had specifically invited 150 of his most wealthy corporate business contacts. The annual membership fees at a place like that were absolutely astronomical, and it was exactly the kind of elite wealthy environment where firm handshakes and last names meant absolutely everything. I kept my voice completely neutral and politely told her that the party sounded very nice. But then my mother hesitated for a long, agonizing moment before making a truly crushing request. She nervously told me that my father did not want anyone at the party introducing me as a medical doctor. He specifically requested that I just attend the upscale event as the simple older sister of Julian in order to keep things uncomplicated. He desperately wanted to ensure that I did not accidentally outshine his precious golden child on his big important night. He did not even bother to send me a formal physical invitation in the mail. A massive part of my brain wanted to immediately decline the verbal invitation. I had spent 12 incredibly hard years quietly building a beautiful, successful life that absolutely did not require their toxic approval or their conditional love. I simply wanted to stay home in my quiet apartment and completely protect the peaceful world I had created for myself. But another deeper part of my heart, the heartbroken 18-year-old girl who quietly folded that rejected college acceptance letter and slid it deep into her pocket, truly needed to see this entire event through to the very end. I took a deep, calming breath and promised my anxious mother I would definitely be there. She exhaled through the phone with massive relief and gently reminded me not to wear anything too attention-grabbing. I calmly agreed and ended the phone call, knowing full well that Julian was always supposed to be the one and only shining star of our entire family. I decided to take a standard rideshare directly to the luxurious country club that evening. I specifically did this because I completely wanted to avoid any uncomfortable questions from the valet drivers or wealthy guests about my car or my current personal life. I just wanted to quietly slip inside, pay my required respects to the family, and slip right back out into the night. I kept my exact promise to my mother and chose my outfit incredibly carefully. I wore a very simple and understated navy blue silk dress that would absolutely not draw any unwanted attention to myself. My one and only personal indulgence was my heavy gold medical school ring, which I wore proudly on my right hand just like I did every single day of my professional life. The exclusive country club ballroom was absolutely dripping with extreme wealth and massive privilege. There were heavy crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings and a live string quartet playing soft classical music in the far corner of the room. I walked inside and immediately spotted my father, Richard, standing near the main entrance. He was actively flashing his perfect corporate smile and greeting all of his important business guests with incredibly firm handshakes. When his eyes finally landed on me, his warm, welcoming expression immediately flickered into complete freezing cold neutrality. He offered absolutely no loving hug and no friendly welcome of any kind. He simply gave me a single cold nod, exactly like I was some distant, annoying acquaintance he was strictly obligated to briefly acknowledge. When a wealthy man standing right beside him innocently asked who I was, my father did not even hesitate for a single second. He dismissively replied that I was just a distant relative and quickly completely changed the subject. Exactly at 8 o'clock in the evening, the soft music finally faded away and my father confidently stepped up to the microphone standing on the small stage. He proudly raised his expensive champagne glass and looked out at the massive crowd. He loudly announced to the 150 guests that we were all gathered there to properly honor his son Julian. Then he boldly called Julian the absolute pride of our family and our one and only successful child. Those exact words hit my chest like a massive physical blow. I stood perfectly frozen near the back of the crowded room while my father shamelessly boasted to his wealthy friends. He proudly claimed that Julian was currently completing his prestigious medical training and perfectly represented the strict dedication to excellence of our family name. But the brutal public humiliation was not completely over yet. A wealthy woman standing right next to me leaned over to her husband and quietly whispered, asking if I was the older daughter of the family. My father happened to be walking past our table right after his speech when another guest innocently asked him about my current life and my career. My father coldly lowered his voice and stated that some children simply do not have anything valuable to contribute to the family legacy. The air around me went entirely cold. I had spent 12 grueling years saving human lives and building a massive medical career through pure sweat and brutal sacrifice. In that exact devastating moment, I finally realized the true depth of his cruelty. My toxic father had not just completely ignored my existence all these years. He had intentionally and completely erased me from his entire world. I had just been completely erased by my own father in front of 150 people. The air in the luxurious ballroom felt incredibly heavy, and I knew I had absolutely no reason to stay in that toxic environment for another single second. I slowly set my untouched glass of sparkling water down on a nearby cocktail table. My hand was surprisingly steady despite the massive heartbreak I was feeling inside. I turned my body completely toward the main exit, fully prepared to walk out the door and never look back at my toxic family ever again. But before I could even take my first step toward the valet parking outside, I noticed someone walking very purposefully directly toward me. It was the beautiful bride-to-be Olivia. She was absolutely glowing under the crystal chandeliers, wearing a stunning cream-colored silk dress that probably cost more than my entire first month of medical school rent. She was completely leaving her group of wealthy friends behind, and her eyes were not looking at my face. Her wide eyes were entirely locked onto the heavy gold medical school ring I was wearing proudly on my right hand. She closed the physical distance between us with very quick and determined steps. When she finally reached me, she nervously apologized for bothering me, but politely asked if I worked at the hospital and if I was by any chance a medical surgeon. All the loud background noise in the massive ballroom suddenly faded away into complete silence. The clinking of expensive champagne glasses and the soft classical music completely dissolved as I looked deeply into the eyes of this woman. I really looked at her face and suddenly a massive medical memory instantly clicked into place inside my brain. 3 years ago at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, my pager went off for a massive trauma emergency. A young woman was rushed into my operating room from a horrific car accident with a completely crushed sternum and massive internal injuries. I had personally stood over her broken body and performed a highly complex and grueling surgery for 7 straight hours, refusing to give up until her heart was beating steadily again. I looked at the bride standing in front of me and softly spoke her name. I told her I remembered her perfectly. The second Olivia realized exactly who I was, thick tears immediately welled up in her beautiful eyes. Her hands flew to her mouth in pure shock. But before either of us could say another emotional word, my younger brother Julian suddenly rushed over to our small table. His face was completely pale with sudden panic, and he immediately tried to aggressively control the unfolding narrative. He put his arm around Olivia and nervously asked what was going on. When Olivia emotionally asked him why he never told her that his older sister was a highly skilled medical surgeon, Julian completely panicked. He looked straight into the eyes of his future wife and lied right to her face. He nervously laughed and claimed that I was definitely not a doctor but just a simple employee working in basic hospital administration. Olivia stepped back and stared at Julian in absolute pure disbelief. She slowly repeated the word administration, out loud, like it was a foreign language. She angrily pulled her arm away from him and firmly revealed the absolute truth. She told Julian that the woman standing right in front of them was not an administrative assistant but the exact same brilliant surgeon who literally held her beating heart in her hands and saved her life 3 years ago. The face of Julian went through pure confusion, absolute panic, and then intense, desperate anger. He grew incredibly frantic because his perfect fabricated image was rapidly shattering in front of all his wealthy guests. He aggressively leaned toward me and harshly demanded that I immediately leave his engagement party. He viciously accused me of causing unnecessary trouble on his big night, desperately trying to sweep his massive lies right back under the rug. But I was absolutely done being the invisible daughter, and I was absolutely done protecting his fragile lies. Right before Olivia had initially walked across the luxurious ballroom to speak with me, I had actually received a very unexpected text message on my phone that completely changed the entire trajectory of the night. A trusted surgical colleague of mine had sent me a quick message asking a seemingly random question. He casually asked if my younger brother Julian had finally finished his medical residency, because my colleague had just seen him working at a corporate pharmaceutical sales conference earlier that week. I had stood alone in my quiet corner of the ballroom and immediately searched the professional name of my brother online. The search results I found on my screen were absolutely staggering. There was no medical license on file, and there was absolutely no hospital residency listed. Julian was officially registered as a standard medical sales representative for a large pharmaceutical company. According to his own professional timeline, he had completely dropped out of his demanding medical residency 2 entire years ago. My mind had raced as I stared blindly at my phone screen. My father, Richard, had proudly handed Julian a massive check for $180,000 specifically for his medical education. Julian had taken that massive amount of money, failed out of his rigorous program, and actively chosen to lie to our entire family for 2 solid years. He happily let my arrogant father stand on stages and boast to his wealthy corporate friends about his brilliant future doctor son, while actively hiding his massive failure. Now, standing face to face with a panicking Julian and a deeply confused Olivia, I knew exactly what I had to do. Julian was aggressively demanding that I leave the party to protect his fragile ego, but I refused to protect his toxic lies for another single second. I looked directly into the eyes of Olivia and gently asked her exactly how much she actually knew about the medical career of her future husband. She nervously stated that he was finishing his final year of internal medicine. I took a deep breath and softly told her the absolute truth. I explained the text message from my colleague and the professional profile I had just discovered. I told her that Julian was absolutely not a medical doctor, and he had been strictly working in pharmaceutical sales for 2 whole years. I watched the warm color completely drain from the beautiful face of Olivia. You could actually see the devastating realization washing over her entirely. All of the vague late-night hours, all of the exhausting hospital stories, and all of the daily complaints about difficult patients were nothing but elaborate, calculated lies. Julian had built their entire romantic relationship and their upcoming marriage on a massive foundation of absolute deceit. He was never at the hospital saving lives. Olivia slowly turned her head and looked at the man she was supposed to marry. Her expression shifted from profound heartbreak to intense, burning anger. Her eyes hardened as she looked back at me. She realized that the arrogant family of Julian actively treated the brilliant surgeon, who literally saved her life, like she was entirely invisible, while aggressively protecting a man who was nothing but a complete fraud. In that exact moment, Olivia quietly decided that the absolute truth desperately needed to come out immediately in front of every single person in that room. Olivia did not hesitate for another single second. She bravely turned her back on the whispering crowd and walked purposefully straight toward the beautifully illuminated stage at the front of the ballroom. The master of ceremonies, who was an old corporate golf buddy of my father, happily handed her the microphone. The entire room of 150 wealthy guests quieted down, completely expecting to hear a standard sweet thank you speech from the beautiful, glowing bride. But Olivia had a completely different message to deliver. She stood tall in her expensive cream-colored silk dress and looked out over the massive crowd. She took a deep, steadying breath and began telling the entire room the harrowing story of her near-fatal car accident from 3 years ago. She described the horrific crash, the completely crushed sternum, and the terrifying moment the emergency room doctors told her parents she would likely not survive the night. The luxurious ballroom was completely captivated by her emotional story. Then Olivia firmly stated that she only survived that horrific night because of one single extraordinary person. She explained that a brilliant cardiothoracic surgeon had operated on her broken body for 7 grueling hours, refusing to let her die. Olivia paused, letting the heavy weight of her words settle over the silent room. Then she pointed her finger directly across the ballroom right at me. She proudly announced to the massive crowd that the surgeon who saved her life was standing right there in the room. She boldly spoke my full name and my official medical title loud and clear for every single person to hear. The ballroom instantly exploded into shocked whispers. Wealthy guests turned their heads entirely confused by this massive revelation. Olivia fearlessly turned her intense gaze directly toward my father, Richard. She confronted him right in front of his elite business friends and demanded to know how he could possibly stand on that very same stage and proudly introduce Julian as his one and only successful child. She publicly shamed him for actively hiding a brilliant daughter who literally saves human lives just to protect his own fragile ego. The perfectly cultivated corporate facade of my father completely crumbled in an instant, and his face turned entirely pale. Before my father could even utter a single excuse, Julian violently stormed the stage. His face was flushed completely red with absolute panic and rage. He grabbed the microphone from the hands of Olivia and started aggressively screaming that I was incredibly jealous and intentionally trying to ruin his special engagement night. I did not shrink back this time. I calmly walked forward up the stage steps with the steady, calm precision of a surgeon. I looked Julian dead in the eye and kept my voice perfectly level. I asked him right into the microphone exactly when he was planning to tell everyone in this room that he completely dropped out of his medical residency 2 entire years ago. I loudly revealed that he was nothing but a pharmaceutical sales representative who had been lying to our family for years. The entire room went absolutely dead silent. Julian stood completely frozen on the stage under the bright spotlight. He had absolutely nothing left to say because his massive web of lies had just completely collapsed. Olivia stepped forward and slowly pulled the incredibly expensive engagement ring off her finger. She looked directly into his panicked eyes and softly told him that she simply could not marry someone she did not actually know. She placed the heavy diamond ring into his trembling hand, turned her back, and confidently walked right out the front door of the luxurious ballroom. Julian was shaking so badly that the ring slipped right through his fingers and fell to the hard marble floor with a small, pathetic clink. Nobody in the massive crowd even moved to pick it up. In the middle of all that stunned silence, my mother Eleanor slowly climbed up the stage steps. I had never seen her make a public scene in my entire life, but her carefully applied makeup was completely ruined by her heavy tears. She walked right up to me and finally apologized for being way too cowardly to protect me when I was just an 18-year-old girl begging for help. She hugged me tightly right in front of my silent father and publicly admitted that I had built my massive success completely alone and entirely despite them. I gently hugged her back, and then I finally turned around and walked out of that exclusive country club. When I stepped outside into the cool night air, I took a massive deep breath, and for the very first time in 12 long years, my chest felt entirely light. This 12-year journey taught me the most valuable lesson of my entire life. You can spend decades desperately waiting for toxic people to finally acknowledge your worth, or you can simply choose to walk away and build your own beautiful life. Setting firm boundaries with your family does not mean you are a cruel person. It simply means you absolutely refuse to let toxic people hurt you or erase your incredible value anymore. You cannot ever force arrogant people to see your true worth, but you have total control over what you do with your own future. If you are listening to this right now and you recognize yourself in my story, please remember that you are entirely enough just as you are. You do not need the approval of anyone who refuses to see your light. Please let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Julian actually deserved exactly what happened to him tonight? If my story helped you find your own courage today, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who really needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories.